Welcome to Celebrities, the Gist HQ, the hottest spot for all the buzz, drama, and untold stories of your favorite stars. I'm Arthur, and trust me, you don't want to miss a second. Let's dive right into the gist.
Welcome to this deep dive. We're looking into something pretty serious today, the collapse of the Cbex scam in Nigeria. It's caused huge financial problems for so many people.
Yeah, the numbers are staggering, aren't they? Reports mention like N1.3 trillion just gone. And affecting, what, over 600,000 Nigerians?
It's massive. And the really worrying thing is this isn't, new. Nigeria's seen these Ponzi schemes before.
Absolutely. There's a long history. You can go way back to Umana in the 80s. And then more recently, we had MBA Forex.
Yeah.
It just keeps happening.
Right. So our mission today really is to try and understand why. Why do these scams keep succeeding despite all the past losses? What can we learn from CBEX and the others?
Exactly. And to do that, we're drawing on quite a few sources, news reports on CBEX itself. There's a really helpful Binance blog post explaining how Ponzi's work generally.
Okay.
And also some analyses looking at the kind of the broader history and the real impact these things have in Nigeria.
Good. So let's start with CBEX then. Let's unpack that. It sounds like they worked pretty hard to look legitimate on the surface.
They really did. Reports say CBEX operating locally as ST Technologies International Limited. Well, they actually registered with the Corporate Affairs Commission.
Okay, the CE. That sounds official.
It does. And even more, surprisingly perhaps, they were apparently listed with the EFCC's Special Control Unit Against Money Laundering.
Wow. The EFCC, that's the main financial crime agency.
Precisely. So you can see how that registration, that listing, it gave them this veneer of credibility. And sadly, a lot of people took that at face value.
But surely there were warning signs, despite those registrations.
Oh, definitely. Big red flags. I mean, first off, they were out there aggressively soliciting money from the public.
They were saying what?
The returns were just, well, outrageous. They promised a 100% return in just 30 days.
100%. In a month.
Yeah. And crucially, CBEX never, ever got a license from the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. That's the main investment regulator. Operating without that is a massive warning sign.
And wasn't there an international warning too?
There was, and this is a key point. Back in April 2024, authorities in Hong Kong issued a public warning specifically about CBEX.
What did it say?
It called them out for falsely claiming they were licensed and for unauthorized transactions. But despite that clear warning, it seems action from Nigerian regulators was, well, slow.
That delay must have cost people dearly. So what's happened to the people behind CBEX now?
It's the classic playbook, unfortunately. The masterminds vanished, gone, leaving behind, chaos, broken promises, and devastating losses for hundreds of thousands.
And the authorities are investigating.
Yes, the EFCC is reportedly probing a figure around N1.2 trillion. They've also declared a foreign national wanted in connection with it all. And there were even some initial reports suggesting CBEX might try to restart operations even after the SEC banned them. Just shows the audacity, really.
Incredible audacity. Okay, so this isn't new, as we said. Let's step back and look at this history of Ponzi schemes in Nigeria. Where does it really begin?
Sources take us back to the 80s and 90s. That's when you first saw these so-called wonder banks popping up. Names like Umana down south, Planwell in Edo State, Naspecto in Lagos.
Wonder banks, right? I remember hearing about those.
Yeah, and they all worked on the same principle, promising incredibly fast returns. And it's all inevitably collapsed when the flow of new money dried up.
Why were people so vulnerable back then?
Well, you had a combination of factors. Financial regulation was much weaker, and there was widespread poverty. That, unfortunately, creates fertile ground for these kinds of promises.
Then fast forward a bit, and we get to MMM. That's a name that I think a lot of people listening will definitely remember.
Oh, absolutely. MMM. It came from Russia, landed in Nigeria around late 2015, and just exploded. Reports suggest maybe 3 million Nigerians were involved at its peak.
3 million? Wow. And how did they pitch it?
They called it a social financial network. The idea was participants were helping each other, but the hook was the promise of a 30% return every month.
30% a month is still huge.
It is. And it really took hold during a major economic recession here. A lot of people were feeling desperate, financially squeezed.
And the marketing was intense, as I recall?
Very aggressive. They used everything, community meetings, churches, especially social media. They recruited heavily.
Did people actually get paid out initially?
Some did, yes. And that's key. Those early payouts created this false sense of security, made it look real. So even when the central bank issued very clear warnings,
people ignored them.
Many did, yeah. The lure of that quick return, maybe easing financial pressure, it was just too strong for a lot of people.
And then inevitably,
it crashed. December 2016, MMM suddenly froze, all accounts. They blamed system overload or something vague.
And the fallout.
Devastating. The NDIC, that's the Deposit Insurance Corporation, estimated losses around N18 billion. The central bank thought maybe N12 billion. But the human cost beyond the numbers was just immense.
Yet, as you said, the cycle didn't stop there. What came after MMM?
It's almost like MMM's collapse just opened the floodgates. Our sources show a real surge between, say, 2016 and 2021.
What kind of schemes?
You had names like Twinkas, Ultimate Cycler, Get Help Worldwide, Loon, Racksterly, and then a really big one, MBA Forex.
MBA Forex, right. That was huge, too.
Massive. They reportedly defrauded investors of something like N213 billion, all under the guise of, legitimate Forex trading. We even saw scams popping up disguised as agricultural crowdfunding.
Goodness. The total losses across all these years must be astronomical. Is there an overall estimate?
The NDIC tried to quantify it. They estimated over N900 billion lost to Ponzi's and similar frauds over about 23 years.
900 billion.
And what's really stark is that roughly N300 billion of that was lost in just the 5 years after M&M collapsed.
So the problem actually got worse after that high-profile failure.
It seems so. You had older schemes like Nespecto accounting for maybe N106 billion, Galaxy Transport N7 billion.
Yeah.
The numbers are just huge. And while the EFCC does make arrests sometimes,
evictions are rare, and getting money back.
Very rare, unfortunately. Yeah. And recovering the actual funds for the victims, extremely difficult, often impossible.
Which brings us back to that core question, why? Why do people in Nigeria keep falling for these, even with this terrible history?
It's complex, definitely. But economic vulnerability is a massive factor. You've got widespread poverty, high unemployment, a struggling economy generally, inflation that's persistently high.
Creates desperation.
Exactly. People are desperate for solutions. And in that environment, the lure of a get-rich-quick scheme, however unrealistic, becomes incredibly potent, especially for young people facing unemployment.
It's more than just needing money, isn't it? It's psychological.
Very much so. That desperation creates this psychological landscape where a promise of quick riches offers hope. A false hope, yes, but a powerful one, an escape route. And that emotional pull can often override rational warnings.
So is it just desperation and maybe ignorance of the risks, or is something else going on?
Sources suggest it's often a mix, that desperation, yes, but also sometimes a degree of greed, or maybe overconfidence.
How so?
Well, it's likely many investors are somewhat aware there are risks, but they convince themselves they can be smarter than the rest. I'll get in early, make my profit, and get out before it crashes.
They think they can time it.
Right. They believe they can beat the system, and that overconfidence makes them vulnerable.
What about the role of endorsements? Influencers, celebrities?
Hugely significant and really damaging.
Yeah.
Our sources point to social media influencers, celebrities, even some pastors or public figures.
Lending their credibility.
Exactly. Often for a fee. They promote these schemes, making them seem legitimate. These promoters really do bear responsibility for the harm caused. They need to be held accountable.
And the schemes often use fancy jargon.
Yes, that's another tactic. Using buzzwords like crypto, forex trading, AI, things many people don't fully grasp. It adds a layer of supposed sophistication, makes it sound cutting edge and trustworthy when it's anything but.
It's interesting you also see this quick profit mentality reflected elsewhere, like in sports betting.
Absolutely. The booming sports betting industry in Nigeria is mentioned by some sources as kind of tapping into that same societal desire for quick, easy money. It reflects a broader mindset.
It really does sound like a perfect storm. Economic hardship meets sophisticated manipulation. To really get why they work, maybe we should break down the basic mechanics. How does a Ponzi scheme actually function?
Sure. The Binance blog has a good, simple explanation. At its core, a Ponzi scheme pays returns to earlier investors using the capital contributed by newer investors.
So the money just moves around. There's no real profit being made.
Precisely. There's no underlying legitimate business activity generating actual income. The whole thing relies entirely on a constant stream of new money coming in from new recruits.
How do they get it started?
Usually by creating some kind of investment opportunity that promises returns that are, frankly, too good to be true. Unrealistic.
Like Charles Ponzi himself.
He's the classic example, yeah.
Oh.
Back in the 1920s, he promised, 40% returns in 3 months on postal coupons? Or think about Bernie Madoff more recently offering consistently high, steady returns that just weren't possible through actual market trading.
And those initial payouts to the first investors are crucial.
Absolutely critical. When those early people get paid the promised returns, it creates this powerful illusion of success. It looks legitimate.
And they tell their friends.
Exactly. Word of mouth marketing kicks in. Those early investors become evangelists, bringing in their friends, family, colleagues. Referral rewards are often used heavily to encourage this.
Sometimes it even becomes mandatory to refer people.
Yes, sometimes it drifts into pyramid scheme territory, where recruitment becomes the main focus, rather than any pretense of investment.
But it's built on sand. Fundamentally, it has to collapse.
It's mathematically doomed. Eventually, the inflow of new investors always slows down. You just can't keep recruiting exponentially forever.
And when the new money stops,
there isn't enough money to pay the promised returns to everyone who's still in. The whole thing collapses. And by that point, the organizers, the ringleaders, they often have an escape plan ready. They disappear with whatever's left.
Leaving most investors with nothing.
Exactly, left holding the bag. The Binance Risk team actually has a neat little formula they suggest for spotting these. Invitation plus guarantee of unrealistically high returns, plus promise of no loss of principal, plus referral rewards. They say that usually equals a Ponzi scheme.
That's a useful checklist.
It is. They even give an example of this hypothetical Lily investing in a crypto scheme, showing how the promise of high returns plus referral bonuses inevitably leads to the whole thing falling apart.
It's a really clear warning sign when you see all those elements together. Okay, let's widen the lens again. What's the broader impact of all this on Nigeria? It's clearly more than just individual losses.
Oh, much more. The damage to the overall financial system, the economy, it's significant. You get huge capital flight, money gets sucked out of regulated banks, out of legitimate capital markets, and poured into these scams.
Which means less money for real businesses.
Exactly. Less liquidity for genuine companies to borrow, invest, grow. And then when these schemes collapse, it can trigger wider instability. Remember the MMM crisis, or there was apparently a bank run linked to another scheme called Ultimate Cycler.
And it must damage trust, fundamentally.
Hugely. People become distrustful, not just of obvious scams, but of the formal financial sector in general. Worryingly, it can even spill over into distrust of legitimate innovations like Propus cryptocurrency exchanges. It hinders progress.
Does the regulatory system struggle to keep up?
It often seems that way. There can be jurisdictional gray areas, legal loopholes these schemes exploit, like pretending to be just crowdfunding. And sadly, there are sometimes allegations of corruption hampering effective enforcement.
Like CBEX apparently not being on an EFCC watch list before it collapsed.
Exactly. That kind of thing raises serious questions about how effective the current monitoring and enforcement really are.
And you mentioned earlier how one scam seems to inspire the next.
Yes, it's a vicious cycle. The perceived success of one major fraud can unfortunately embolden others with bad intentions to try something similar. Plus, think about all that lost capital, billions of naira.
Money that could have gone into
productive parts of the economy, small businesses, agriculture, tech startups, things that actually create jobs and drive GDP growth. Instead, that capital just vanishes into these scams. It holds back development.
And deepens inequality.
Absolutely. It tends to hit ordinary people hardest, deepening poverty, increasing income inequality. And it puts more strain on social services when people lose their savings.
So, given all that damage, what's the way forward? What needs to happen to break this cycle in Nigeria?
It really has to be a multi-pronged approach. There's no single silver bullet. Stronger regulation is definitely key.
What would that look like?
Mandatory licensing for all investment platforms, including crypto ones. Much better collaboration with international bodies like Interpol, because often these scams have cross-border elements.
And being more proactive, not just reacting after the fact.
Crucial. Proactive enforcement. Real-time monitoring to spot suspicious activity early. Swift action when red flags appear. And yes, better international cooperation. There's a new Investments in Securities Act 2025 mentioned in sources.
That could help.
It has potential, yes.
Yeah.
But its real impact will depend entirely on how well it's actually implemented and enforced on the ground.
Regulation is one piece. What about educating the public?
Absolutely vital. Financial literacy needs to be part of the education system long term. But shorter term, we need robust public awareness campaigns.
How could those work?
Using things like SMS alerts to warn people directly about high-risk schemes, really getting the message out there consistently.
And promoting legitimate alternatives so people have somewhere safer to put their money.
Yes, definitely. Expanding access to and understanding of real regulated investment options. Things like treasury bills, REITs, those are real estate investment trusts.
A way to invest in property indirectly.
Right? Or even properly vetted venture capital for those who understand the risks. Encouraging fintech innovation to create competitive, safe investment products is also important.
So it's about giving people better options, but also changing attitudes.
Exactly. It's about broad public sensitization. Hammering home the need for due diligence, check things out yourself. Verify platforms are licensed. Understand what realistic returns actually look like. Be incredibly skeptical of get-rich-quick promises.
And maybe a return to more traditional values.
Some sources suggest that, yeah. A cultural shift back towards valuing hard work and sustainable effort as the way to build lasting wealth, rather than chasing instant riches.
This has been incredibly insightful and quite sobering, really, looking at the scale of this problem. If you had to distill it down, what's the single biggest takeaway for you from this deep dive?
For me, it's that these Ponzi schemes aren't just, isolated crimes by a few bad apples. They represent a serious systemic risk to Nigeria's financial health.
Yeah.
They drain capital, they distort trust, and they make economic hardship worse for so many people. It's a deep-rooted issue.
And clearly, no easy answers.
None at all. It needs that sustained, combined effort we talked about.
Yeah.
Tougher regulation that's actually enforced, much better financial literacy across the board, and perhaps hardest of all, a real shift in mindset away from that dangerous allure of easy, risk-free money.
Which leads to a final thought, I suppose. When you see these cycles repeating decade after decade, it makes you ask, what fundamental changes, maybe societal, maybe deeper economic ones, are truly needed to finally break this pattern in Nigeria? How do you build a culture where sustainable wealth creation is the norm, not the exception?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Something really important for all of us, especially those listening in Nigeria, to think about.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing all that expertise and walking us through this complex issue. It's been really valuable.
Thanks for hanging out with us on Celebrities, the Gist HQ. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and come back for more juicy stories. Until next time, keep living the Gist life.